Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
It is really good to be here. We've got a pretty heavy stack on the desk today.
We really do. Today we're taking a very dense, very personal, and honestly very data-heavy Text Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, and we are going to use it to perform an institutional analysis of the modern food system.
Right.
And I want to be very precise about our framing right out of the gate here.
Me too, because I feel like the title alone usually sends people into these defensive crouches.
Exactly. Yeah. When people hear the title Eating Animals, they tend to assume they're walking into, a 60-minute moral lecture or some polemic about why they should become vegetarian.
Which is not.
That is not what we are doing today at all. We are not here to police anyone's dinner plate.
Right.
We're here to look at the machinery behind the curtain. We're treating this book as a piece of systems analysis.
Yeah, we want to understand industrial animal agriculture as exactly that, an industrial system. We're going to map its architectures, its economic incentives, the biological consequences, and the psychological mechanisms that keep it running.
Because it is a massive global industrial complex. And it has fundamentally altered biology, economics, and the environment in ways that are, frankly, almost invisible to the end user.
Almost entirely invisible. And the core tension we're exploring today, the reason we are calling this a crisis in perception, is the massive, deliberately constructed gap between what we think farming is and what it actually is in the 21st century.
It's the gap between the story and the system.
Yes.
Because even for those of us who consider ourselves, well-informed, when the word farm is spoken, there is this residual image that flashes in the mind.
The picture book image.
Right. The red barn, the silo, the rolling green hills, maybe a farmer in overalls who actually knows the names of his animals. It's this very pastoral image. It feels like tradition. It feels like stewardship.
And that image is effectively a hallucination. It's a screen that hides the reality. And the reality, as Foer lays out with really devastating statistical precision, is that 99% of the land animals eaten in the United States come from factory farms.
99%.
Not the red barn, the CAFO, the concentrated animal feeding operation.
That number, that 99% figure, is the first structural reality we have to internalize today. It means that the pastoral farm is statistically irrelevant.
It's a rounding error.
Exactly. If you are eating meat, dairy, or eggs, and you didn't personally drive to a farm and shake the hand of the grower, you are almost certainly consuming the output of this industrial system.
Precisely. And that system relies on us not seeing it. It relies on the persistence of the story over the reality, which is why I love how Foer opens the book. He starts with a very personal narrative involving his grandmother.
I thought that was a brilliant entry point.
It really is, because it establishes right away that food is never just a collection of proteins and carbohydrates. Food is identity. It's history.
This was one of the most compelling parts of the introduction for me. He talks about his grandmother, who survived the war in Europe. She spent years on the run, starving, eating rotting potatoes.
Scraps, garbage.
Anything she could find to stay alive.
Right. And for her generation, and specifically for her experience, survival was the only metric. Caloric intake was literally a daily victory against death.
Right. And then, 50 years later, she is in America. She's the matriarch of this family, and she expresses her love through the sheer volume of food she provides.
The family calls her the greatest chef who ever lived.
They do. But Foer makes this fascinating systems-level observation about that title. He notes that her greatest chef status had absolutely nothing to do with the gustatory quality of the food.
She basically had one recipe.
Chicken with carrots. And by all accounts, it wasn't even particularly good chicken.
No, he says the food was delicious, not because of the ingredients or the technique, but because they believed it was delicious. They were eating the story.
There's that line, "We believed in our grandmother's cooking more fervently than we believed in God." That really struck me. It establishes the thesis that we taste the context as much as the chemistry.
Yeah.
When you sit down to a Thanksgiving turkey or a Sunday roast, you're consuming a story of family, of survival, of tradition, of care.
But the crisis in perception arises because while we are consuming that story of love and tradition, we are physically funding a system that is often the exact opposite of those values.
We're funding a high-tech industrial manufacturing process
where biology is treated not as a living thing to be nurtured, but as an obstacle to be overcome.
So let's dismantle that manufacturing process. If we strip away the story of the grandmother in the red barn, what are we actually looking at? How is the system designed?
We have to start with the definition. A factory farm, or CAAO, isn't just a traditional farm that got bigger. It represents a fundamental shift in the ontology of the animal, the very nature of its existence.
Four references the philosopher Jacques Derrida here, aren't they?
Yes. Derrida calls this industrialization of animal life an event. It's an unprecedented subjection of animal life. It is the moment in history where we decided to stop treating animals as living creatures with their own biological imperatives and started treating them as widgets.
Widgets, just standardized parts in a machine.
Literally.
Mm.
If you read the industry literature from the mid-20th century, which Foer cites extensively, the language is entirely explicit. They describe the laying hen as a converting machine. They describe the pig as a machine in a factory.
That's incredibly cold.
It is. The goal of the system is to standardize the unit of production to ensure predictable outputs. And to understand how we got here, we really have to look at the prototype for the entire industry.
The chicken.
The chicken.
The chicken is kind of the patient zero of factory farming. And the history here is fascinating because it wasn't a grand corporate master plan from day one. It started with a logistical error in 1923.
Celia Steele, the Delaware housewife who inadvertently invented the broiler industry.
It's such a small historical detail, but it changed the world. She ordered 50 chicks for her small backyard flock, intending to raise them for eggs and maybe a little meat. But the hatchery messed up the order. They sent her 500.
A tenfold increase, which, in 1923, the conventional wisdom was that you could not keep that many chickens alive in one place.
Right, they get sick.
They would succumb to disease, they would peck each other to death due to stress, and the winter cold would kill them. But Steele made a decision that pivoted the entire trajectory of agriculture. She decided to keep them indoors, in a shed, through the winter.
And this is where the technology comes in. Because she couldn't have done this a few years earlier, she had access to a brand new scientific discovery synthetic vitamin supplements.
Specifically vitamins A and D. This was the technological unlock. Before this, chickens needed sunlight to synthesize vitamin D and access to green forage for vitamin A.
If you locked them in a shed before that, they'd just develop rickets and die.
Exactly. With the supplements mixed into their feed, Steele realized she could sever the connection between the animal and the earth. She could keep them alive entirely indoors.
And she sold those 500 birds for a massive profit. The next year, she ordered 1,000. By 1926, she had 10,000. By 1935, she was raising 250,000 birds.
That is exponential growth.
Yep.
It is the birth of the confinement model. But scaling up the number of birds was really just the first phase of the design. To make it a true factory, they realized they had to redesign the animal itself. A 1920s chicken was an active, slow-growing bird. It just wasn't suited for a factory environment.
Which leads us to the Chicken of Tomorrow contest.
Yes.
Which sounds like a retro-futurist joke, but it was a very real government-sponsored event in 1946.
It was a national competition orchestrated by the A&P supermarket chain and the USDA to genetically engineer a better biological widget.
They wanted a bird with bigger breasts, right? Because white meat was becoming popular.
Bigger breasts, bigger thighs, and most importantly, a faster growth rate. They wanted to compress the time between hatching and slaughter.
And they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But redesign is a very polite way of putting it. They essentially broke the animal's biology to fit the spreadsheet.
They engineered it for speed. Let's just look at the data for a second. A modern broiler chicken, which is the standard bird you buy at any supermarket today, grows so fast that if a human baby grew at the same rate, that baby would weigh 660 pounds after 2 months.
Wait, 660 pounds?
Yes.
That is a terrifying visualization. A 660-pound, 2-month-old baby.
It's a biological tragedy. The bird's internal organs and skeletal system simply cannot keep pace with the muscle growth. Their hearts often fail because they literally cannot pump blood through that much mass. Their bones break under their own weight.
It's just too much weight too fast.
We see things like kinky back, where the spine deforms. And these birds are slaughtered at roughly 39 to 42 days old.
They're just over a month old.
They're still peeping like chicks. They still have the blue eyes of chicks. But they're trapped in these massive, grotesque, adult-sized bodies.
So the design of the system involved completely redesigning the organism itself, but it also involved redesigning the economic relationship between the grower and the corporation. This is the concept of vertical integration.
Right. This is the economic architecture that allows the biological architecture to exist. In the old model, a farmer was an independent business owner. They owned the birds, they bought feed from whoever they wanted, and they sold their eggs or meat to the local market.
But today,
Today, the industry is dominated by integrators, massive corporations like Tyson, Purdue, or Smithfield.
and these companies own the entire supply chain.
Everything. They own the genetics, the actual intellectual property of the breed. They own the feed mills. They own the trucking fleets. They own the slaughterhouses and the processing plants.
So where does the farmer fit into all of this?
The farmer has basically been demoted. Foer explains that the farmer creates the one thing the company doesn't want to own, which is the capital risk and the waste.
Oh, wow.
The farmer owns the mortgage on the massive confinement sheds. The farmer owns the manure, but they do not own the birds.
Foer actually quotes a farmer who describes himself as a counselor at a sleepaway camp.
It's a dark but very accurate analogy. The corporation drops off the chicks and the feed. They give the farmer a strict manual: keep the lights at this exact lux, keep the temperature at this exact degree. If the farmer deviates, they lose their contract. Then, 40 days later, the corporation picks up the birds, and the farmer is paid based on a tournament system where they are actively pitted against their neighbors.
It sounds like a modern form of serfdom. The farmer takes on the debt, often hundreds of thousands of dollars, just to build these highly specialized sheds, while the corporation takes the profit and dictates all the terms.
And once that shed is built, the farmer is completely locked in. You can't use a poultry confinement shed for anything else. You can't grow corn in it. You can't store tractors in it. It's too low-ceilinged and specialized. You must grow chickens to pay the mortgage. It is total infrastructure lock-in.
Let's visualize these sheds for a moment, because the word shed implies something small in your backyard. We are talking about industrial warehouses.
Huge ones. The standard dimensions are often around 45 feet wide by 500 feet long. That is longer than a professional football field.
And inside that single room,
Upwards of 33,000 birds.
I try to picture 33,000 of anything in one room, and my brain just fails.
Foer provides a very visceral analogy for this. Take a standard piece of printer paper.
Okay.
That is roughly the amount of floor space allocated to each bird. Now imagine laying 33,000 sheets of paper edge to edge on the floor of a warehouse. Now place a living, breathing, defecating bird on every single sheet. No aisles, no open space, just a carpet of white feathers and flesh.
And it is a completely controlled environment. It's a sealed system.
Total environmental control. Windows are removed because sunlight makes the birds active and activity burns calories.
And they want them sedentary.
Exactly. They manipulate the light cycles, sometimes keeping the lights on 24 hours a day or flashing them to disrupt the birds' sleep patterns so they just keep waking up and eating. In the egg industry, they have historically used starvation, literally withholding food for days or weeks, to shock the hens' bodies into a molt to force another cycle of egg laying. It is biological manipulation on a grand scale.
So that is the design phase. We have turned the animal into a proprietary widget, the farm into a factory, and the farmer into a precarious contract laborer within a vertical monopoly. The obvious question you have to ask is, why? Why did we build a system that looks like a horror movie set?
The short answer is efficiency. But we need to define efficiency carefully here. The prime directive of this entire system is cheap protein.
A chicken in every pot. That was the political promise.
Herbert Hoover's promise. And the industrial system delivered on it with incredible effectiveness. If you adjust for inflation, the price of almost every major asset in American life has skyrocketed. A house costs 1,500% more than it did in the mid-century. A car costs 1,400% more. But chicken. The price of chicken has effectively dropped. And in real terms, it is cheaper today than it was in 1950.
And as consumers, we celebrate that. We see a $5 rotisserie chicken at Costco, and we think, wow, this is a miracle of the free market. We don't complain when the grocery bill is low.
Exactly. But this is where we have to put on our economist hats and talk about the incentive architecture. Specifically, the concept of externalities. This is central to Foer's institutional analysis. An externality is a cost that is generated by a business but paid for by society, not the business itself.
This is the hidden bill. Like, if I buy that $5 chicken, I am paying $5 at the register. But there are actual costs associated with producing that chicken that aren't included in that $5.
Correct. Take Smithfield, the pork giant. Foer notes that the production of pork creates massive amounts of toxic waste. If Smithfield actually had to pay for the environmental damage they cause, if they had to treat the sewage they create like a city does, if they had to compensate neighbors for the loss of property value and health, if they had to pay for the antibiotic resistance they are breeding, their business model would collapse instantly. They would not be profitable.
So the profitability of the entire industry depends on their ability to offload those costs onto the public.
The system is designed to privatize the profits and socialize the risks. It is an artificial cheapness. And to maintain that artificial low price, the system must be ruthless about feed conversion.
This is the metric that rules the industry, right?
It is the god of the integrator. The feed conversion ratio, or FCR. How many pounds of corn and soy do I have to put into this animal to get 1 pound of saleable meat out? For cattle, it's quite high, maybe 6 or 7 to 1. For pigs, it's lower. For these genetically engineered chickens, it is approaching 1.5 to 1. They are incredibly efficient at turning grain into flesh.
But as they push that ratio lower and lower, they have to cut every other conceivable corner. They cut space, they cut medical care, they cut labor costs. And this creates a major problem, because if the consumer actually saw the reality of how that efficiency is achieved, if they saw the windowless shed and the crippled birds, they might stop buying.
Yes.
So the system has to hide itself.
This is the second part of the incentive architecture, the illusion of choice. The system protects itself through language. It creates a lexicon designed to bridge the gap between consumer perception and industrial reality.
We see this on every single package at the store: all natural, farm fresh, humane, free range.
It's mostly noise. It is just a marketing signal designed to reassure you.
Let's drill down into free range, because this is the one that always gets me. I buy free range eggs. I stand there in the aisle. I see the carton with the nice illustration of a happy hen on a green hill. And I pay the extra dollar or two because I think, okay, these chickens are living a decent life.
And that is exactly what the label is engineered to make you feel. But Foer digs into the actual USDA regulations. For poultry to be labeled free range, the only requirement is that the birds have access to the outdoors.
Well, access sounds good.
But access is not defined quantitatively. In practice, for a shed of 33,000 birds, access often means a single small door at one end of the building. And that door might just open onto a small concrete pad or a dirt patch.
So do the birds actually go out?
Most of them never even see the door. The food and water are inside. They're bred to be sedentary. They're terrified of open spaces because they've literally never seen them. But because the door technically exists, the company can legally label the product free range and charge you a premium.
That feels like a total scam. It's a regulatory loophole that functions as a moral shield for the consumer.
It creates a moral offset. It allows the consumer to feel they have opted out of the industrial system without actually requiring the industry to change its fundamental practices.
Foer even complicates the narrative around the good guys in farming. He spends time with Joel Salatin at Polyface Farm, who was sort of the hero of Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma. Salatin raises birds on pasture. He moves them every day. It's widely considered the gold standard of ethical farming.
It is. But Foer points out a critical nuance that almost always gets missed. Even Salatin, the best of the best, is forced to use the industrial Cornish cross broiler genetics. He buys the chicks from a hatchery. Foer notes that even on Salatin's beautiful pasture, these birds are so genetically compromised from decades of engineering that they must be slaughtered at 42 days.
Even on the perfect farm.
Yes. If Salatin let them live to 60 days, they would die of heart failure or their legs would snap.
So the design is so deep, it's literally in the DNA. You can't just farm better to fix the problem if the animal itself is structurally broken.
Exactly. The incentives drive costs down, externalize damage, mask the reality with language, create a trap that even the most well-intentioned farmers struggle to escape.
This brings us to phase 3 of our analysis structural outcomes. If you design a system for maximum speed and minimum cost, and you treat living creatures as inanimate widgets, certain consequences are inevitable. And I want to be super clear here. These aren't accidents. They are features of the system.
We need to categorize these outcomes. Let's start with the animal outcomes. And a warning to you listening, we have to be descriptive here. We cannot analyze the system without looking at what it physically does.
Let's talk about the mutilations, because it's a strong word, but it really is the only word for it.
When you crowd thousands of animals into a confined space, they become incredibly stressed. It is a high-pressure psychological environment. In the wild, if an animal is stressed or aggressive, it moves away. In a CFO, it cannot. So they fight, they peck, they bite.
And the industry's solution isn't to give them more space.
No, space costs money. That violates the prime directive of cheap protein. The solution is to alter the animal to fit the crowded space. For chickens, standard practice is debeaking.
Describe that process.
It involves a worker holding the chick and pressing its beak against a hot blade, essentially a heated guillotine. It sears off the sensitive tip of the beak. This prevents the bird from pecking its neighbors to death. It is done without anesthesia.
And for pigs?
Tail docking. Pigs are highly intelligent, curious animals. Put them in a concrete pen with absolutely nothing to do. They get bored and frustrated. They start biting each other's tails. This can lead to severe infection. So, the industry slices off the tails of piglets, again, without pain relief. They also clip their teeth and castrate the males.
And the argument is always efficiency. It's faster and cheaper to just cut a body part off than to provide a humane environment.
The system views pain management as an unnecessary line item on the spreadsheet. And this indifference to suffering extends to the end of the animal's life. Foer's description of the slaughter line is harrowing. But importantly, he argues that the cruelty we see in those undercover videos, workers stomping on chickens, slamming piglets, isn't just about bad apples or sadists.
Right. It's really easy to demonize the slaughterhouse worker, but Foer frames it as a structural labor issue.
It is a structural inevitability. Imagine the line speed. In a poultry plant, the line moves so fast that workers are expected to process thousands of birds per hour. They have to grab a live, terrified bird, shackle it upside down, and do this every few seconds for an 8-hour shift. The room is incredibly loud. It smells of blood and feces. The animals are screaming.
It sounds like an absolute psychological nightmare.
It is a chaotic, high-pressure environment designed to break both animals and humans. If you treat the animal as a thing, you inevitably start treating the worker as a thing, which leads us to the human labor outcomes. The turnover rate in these plants is staggering. It's often 100–150% annually.
That means the entire workforce quits and has to be completely replaced every single year.
Which tells you that it is a job that is fundamentally incompatible with human well-being. Foer tells the story of Maria, a worker on a chicken line. Her job involves a repetitive cutting motion. After years of this, her hands are totally destroyed. She has permanent nerve damage. She can't hold a spoon. She can't wash dishes for her own children.
She has been consumed by the system just as much as the chicken has.
And who is filling these jobs? The industry deliberately targets vulnerable populations. Undocumented immigrants, refugees, people with very few options and no political power. They are people who cannot complain to OSHA, who cannot form a union, who cannot sue when their bodies give out.
It's systemic exploitation.
Yeah.
We get cheap chicken because Maria pays with her hands.
And we all pay with our health. This brings us to the public health outcomes. This is the part of the analysis that shifts the risk from the farm directly to the general population. Specifically, antibiotic resistance.
This was the data point that really shook me. I mean, I knew they gave animals medicine. I grew up thinking, oh, the farmer gives the sick cow a shot, but the scale of it is incomprehensible.
The Union of Concerned Scientists has estimated that around 70% of all medically important antibiotics used in the United States are fed to farm animals.
Let that sink in for a second. The vast majority of antibiotics, these miracle drugs that save human lives, are not going to humans. They're going into livestock feed.
And the critical distinction is why. They aren't using these drugs therapeutically to cure sick animals. They are using them non-therapeutically.
Meaning they're feeding drugs to totally healthy animals.
Yes, for two main reasons.
Uh-huh.
First, in the 1940s, scientists discovered that low doses of antibiotics change the gut flora of animals in a way that makes them absorb more calories. It actually makes them grow faster. It's a growth hack.
Wow.
Second, it acts as a prophylactic. When you cram 33,000 birds into a filthy shed, walking in their own waste, their immune systems crash. The antibiotics are literally the only thing keeping the flock from dying off en masse.
So the antibiotics are just a structural crutch. They allow the overcrowding to exist in the first place?
Exactly. They are the mortar holding the factory farm together. But the biological cost is incredibly high. The farm becomes a training ground for bacteria. You have a massive density of hosts, constant exposure to low doses of the drug, and massive amounts of waste. It is an evolutionary pressure cooker.
The bacteria just learn to survive.
They evolve resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And those resistant bacteria, things like MRSA, multi-drug-resistant salmonella, they don't stay on the farm. They leave on the meat, they leave on the workers' boots, they leave in the wind.
So when I go to the hospital with the staph infection and the doctor tells me the antibiotic isn't working, it might be because that antibiotic was rendered completely useless to produce a slightly cheaper chicken nugget.
That is the literal trade-off we are making. We are eroding the efficacy of modern medicine to subsidize the cost of meat.
And closely related to this is the pandemic risk. Foer quotes the World Health Organization and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. And they aren't mincing words about this at all.
No. As early as 2004, these organizations listed increasing demand for animal protein as a primary risk factor for zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that jump from animals to humans. Factory farms are viral amplifiers.
We've seen this play out with bird flu H5N1 and swine flu H1N1.
Think about the basic biology. If you have a backyard flock of 20 chickens and one gets a virus, it might die or it might recover. The virus has a very limited number of hosts, but if you have a shed with 30,000 genetically identical birds, immunocompromised birds, that virus can replicate billions of times in a matter of days. That gives it billions of chances to mutate.
It's systems thinking again. You can't isolate the farm from the rest of the world. The virus doesn't respect property lines.
And neither does the pollution. This is the environmental outcome. We have to talk about the waste.
The lagoons.
Right. A pig produces about 3 times as much waste as a human. A large hog operation with thousands of animals produces as much raw sewage as a medium-sized city. But a city has a sewage treatment plant. We treat human waste before we release it. Farms do not.
So where does all that waste go?
It goes into open-air pits called lagoons. They are vast, pink, toxic lakes of manure, urine, and chemicals.
Why are they pink?
Bacterial interactions and the chemicals they use. Foer describes them very vividly. And when the lagoon gets full, they have to empty it. So they use high-pressure sprinkler systems to spray the liquid manure straight into the air over what they call spray fields.
They just spray it into the air.
To let it evaporate and settle into the ground. But if you live downwind, Foer interviews people living near these farms in North Carolina. They describe a fecal mist. You can't open your windows. You can't hang laundry outside. Residents suffer from asthma, immune disorders, severe headaches. It is literally raining waste on them.
And this connects back to the broader climate conversation. We often hear about cars and planes, but livestock is a massive driver of global warming.
The UN reports have stated that the livestock sector contributes more to greenhouse gas emissions than the entire global transport sector combined. Methane from cows, nitrous oxide from manure, these are incredibly potent greenhouse gases. If you care about climate change, the data says you absolutely have to care about how meat is produced.
There is one more environmental outcome that I think is often overlooked because it happens completely out of sight. Foer calls it underwater factory farming.
The industrialization of the ocean. We treat the sea exactly like we treat the land as a resource to be aggressively mined.
We use military technology to do it right.
We do. Industrial trawlers use radar, sonar, GPS, and spotter planes to hunt fish schools with lethal precision. But the system is incredibly blunt. It relies on massive nets that just scoop up everything in their path. This leads to massive bycatch.
The collateral damage.
The ratios are horrifying. For the shrimp industry, the bycatch ratio can be as high as 26-to-1.
Explain that ratio for us.
For every 1 pound of shrimp that makes it to your plate, 26 pounds of other sea life juvenile fish, turtles, sharks, crabs, are killed and thrown back over the side as waste.
That is insanity. I mean, imagine if you went to the grocery store to buy a pound of apples, and the store forced you to destroy 26 pounds of oranges and bananas before you could leave.
It creates dead zones in the ocean. It is effectively strip mining the ecosystem.
So we have this catalog of horrors. Animal cruelty, labor exploitation, antibiotic resistance, pandemic risk, environmental toxicity. This leads us to phase 4, persistence. Why is this system so locked in? If it's this bad, why doesn't it collapse?
It's robust because of lock-in. We talked about the farmers and their massive debt. That is infrastructure lock-in. Once you build the machine, you have to feed it. But there's also cultural lock-in.
Which brings us back to the Thanksgiving turkey.
The turkey is the ultimate symbol here. For us, deconstructs this ritual. We gather to celebrate values of gratitude, abundance, and family. The centerpiece of that ritual is a bird. But that bird is a biological monstrosity. It cannot reproduce naturally. It has to be artificially inseminated. It cannot fly. It is pumped full of chemistry.
It is a product of the factory, but we treat it as a product of nature.
And that is the core conflict. If we actually brought the reality of the bird to the dinner table, if we talked about the turkey's artificial insemination or the abscesses in its liver while we were carving it, it would ruin the meal. It would completely shatter the ritual.
So we choose not to know.
We engage in willful ignorance. This is psychological inertia. We protect the story because we need the story.
It goes back to the grandmother at the beginning of the book. To reject the food feels like rejecting the love.
Identity is a system. Our diet is woven into our sense of self, our masculinity, our nationalism, our family history. Foer admits this himself. He struggled with it deeply. It is incredibly difficult to opt out of a system that is everywhere.
But Foer's argument, and this is phase 5, interconnection, is that we can't afford to keep the blinders on anymore. because all these systems are knotted together.
You cannot view this in isolation. It connects directly to global capitalism. Consider the grain again. We take roughly 756 million tons of grain and corn annually, and we feed it to animals.
That's food that could be feeding humans.
It is a massive caloric inefficiency. We are taking protein that humans could eat, filtering it through an animal which burns most of it just for baseline energy, and getting a tiny fraction of the calories back as meat. In a world with severe food insecurity, using prime agricultural land to grow feed for factory animals is a massive misallocation of global resources.
So the cheap burger in Chicago is directly connected to grain prices in Africa.
And it connects to the ecology of disease. As we said, the virus doesn't care about your borders or your politics. A pathogen brewing in a poultry shed in Southeast Asia or Arkansas is a global threat.
So we've looked at the design, the incentives, the outcomes, the persistence, and the interconnections. We have basically taken the machine apart piece by piece.
Now we have to put it back together and answer the core question of this episode.
Let's do it.
What is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis is a failure of category.
Explain that.
The misperception is that we categorize farming as a biological pastoral act. We think of it as nature. But the reality is that it is a high-tech industrial manufacturing process. It is heavy industry.
And because we misperceive the category, we completely miscalculate the cost.
Exactly. The obscured structural layer is the interconnectedness of all this damage. We see the price tag at the register, $5 for the chicken, and our surface interpretation is food is cheap, the system works.
But systems-level analysis reveals the shadow costs. It reveals that the low price is actually a form of debt. We are borrowing from the future effectiveness of antibiotics. We are borrowing from the stability of the climate. We are borrowing from the health of rural communities.
So the visibility changes everything. When you apply systems thinking, the animal disappears and is replaced by a unit of production.
And when you see that unit of production, you realize that the violence isn't an accident. It isn't a glitch in the system. The violence is the design. The crisis in perception is that we are looking at a factory and calling it a farm. And until we call it a factory and regulate it like a factory and account for its costs like a factory, nothing will change.
That is a very sober reality. And I think for anyone listening, your next trip to the grocery store is going to feel very different. The aisle is no longer just food. It's a map of these systems.
That is the goal. Seeing clearly is the first step toward any kind of real agency.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.